So, how does a college dropout, a guy known for being, well, incredibly difficult, end up changing the entire world? How do you actually put a dent in the universe? Well, today on The Explainer, we're cracking open Walter Isaacson's massive biography of Steve Jobs to figure that out.
And really, this quote right here, it's everything. It's the key that unlocks the whole puzzle of who Steve Jobs was. See, Isaacson's book really hammers this one point home. The real magic, the stuff that changes everything, happens at this crossroads between art and technology, between the humanities and the sciences. And for Jobs, you gotta understand, this wasn't some clever marketing slogan. It was in his DNA.
So you might be wondering, how did Isaacson get this close to the story? Well, get this. Jobs himself actually asked him to write it, and he gave him total access. We're talking friends, family, his biggest rivals, even people he'd fired. Jobs wanted the real story told, you know? The good, the bad, all of it. No filter.
Okay, so let's jump into Act 1, the revolution. Picture this, it's 1976. We're in a garage in Cupertino. Classic startup story, right? But this was something different. This was, well, it was a revolution. It was all about this rebellious counterculture energy, this crazy idea that computers shouldn't just be for big corporations and scientists. They should be for everyone, for the rest of us.
I mean, this quote just says it all, doesn't it? It's the perfect comeback to anyone who says, but what does the market research say? Jobs' whole thing was that people don't actually know what they want until you show it to them. He saw his job not as giving people what they asked for, but as inventing the future they didn't even know they were dreaming of. So to build the Mac, he put together this team of what he called A players, a band of pirates really, and he pushed them like crazy. At the heart of it all was his famous, or maybe infamous, reality distortion field. This thing was basically his superpower. It was this mix of insane charisma and sheer force of will that could make people believe the impossible was possible. You know, convincing an engineer that a project that should take 6 months could actually get done in a week. And the wildest part? It usually worked.
But here's the thing about that kind of intensity. The very fire that created Apple, well, it was about to burn its creator. This leads us to Act 2, the wilderness. And let's just say, this act doesn't end with a triumph. It ends with Jobs getting kicked out of his own company.
Yeah, he was fired. I mean, it's just wild to think about, right? The guy who had just given the world the Macintosh was suddenly out, just gone. And the kicker? The guy who led the charge to oust him was the CEO that Jobs himself had hired. Talk about irony. But Isaacson makes this really important point. This wasn't the end for Steve Jobs, not by a long shot. These so-called wilderness years were actually crucial. At his new company, Next, he was perfecting the software that would eventually become the heart of Apple's comeback. And over at a little graphics company he bought, which he renamed Pixar, he learned all about storytelling. So these weren't failures. They were more like practice, a dress rehearsal for the biggest comeback in business history.
Which brings us to Act 3, the return. It's 1997, and Apple is, for all intents and purposes, dead. We're talking weeks away from going bankrupt. So, in a last-ditch effort, they buy Next, and in doing so, they accidentally bring back the one person who could save them. What followed was, well, it was absolutely legendary.
First thing he does, he just brutally simplifies everything. He takes Apple's confusing product line and cuts it down to just a handful of things. Then he partners up with this designer, Jony Ive, and together they create the iMac. And this thing, it looked like it was from another planet. It was fun, it was colorful, it was personal. It was a statement that said, Apple is back. Next up, the iPod. 1,000 songs in your pocket. This wasn't just a product, it was a cultural shift. It completely changed the music industry. It changed how we thought about our digital lives. That little white box was everywhere.
And then, 2007, the iPhone. It's hard to overstate how big this was. Steve Jobs gets on stage and introduces 3 revolutionary products: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communicator. But then he reveals it's not 3 separate devices, it's one device. And just like that, the world was never the same again. It literally changed everything. You'd think after the iPhone, that's it, right? What else could you possibly do? Well, then came the iPad, and everyone at first was like, it's just a big iPhone. But it wasn't. It created an entirely new category of device, right there between the phone and the laptop. It was the start of what he called the post-PC era.
So what's the one thing that connects the iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad? It's this idea, this core belief of Jobs is that design isn't just about how something looks. It's not just the paint job. It's the soul. It's about how it works, how it feels in your hand, how it makes you feel when you use it.
All right, so after this incredible journey, the revolution, the exile, the unbelievable comeback, what's the final takeaway? What's the big lesson from Isaacson's book about this incredibly complex man?
And it all comes full circle, right back to where we started. That intersection of the humanities and the sciences. That was his genius. He believed that technology on its own wasn't enough. It had to be married with art, with intuition, with a deep understanding of what makes us human. That's why his products weren't just tools. They felt like, well, like magic.
And this quote from his hero, Bob Dylan, this was basically his life's motto. If you're not busy being born, you're busy dying. It's this idea that you have to constantly be reinventing yourself, pushing forward, never getting comfortable. For Steve Jobs, standing still was the same as being dead.
Now, what makes Isaacson's book so good is that it is brutally honest. This is not a book that puts Steve Jobs on a pedestal. It shows you the genius, the visionary, but it also shows you the guy who could be a total jerk, a tyrant even. The book's brilliance is that it shows how those two sides of him weren't separate. They were completely intertwined. His insane passion was the same engine that also made him so difficult.
So, the final grade. For its incredible depth, its honesty, and for telling one of the most compelling stories of our time, we're giving Walter Isaacson's Steve Jobs a solid 9.5 out of 10. It's essential reading. Seriously, if you want to understand the world we live in today, you kind of have to understand this guy.
And if you want to dive even deeper, we've got a couple of recommendations for you. First, check out Isaacson's other big book, The Innovators. It's basically the prequel to this story, covering the whole history of the digital revolution. Then you absolutely have to read Creativity, Inc. It's by Ed Catmull, the co-founder of Pixar, and it's an amazing inside look at the creative culture Jobs helped foster there.
And that wraps up our look at the life and legacy of Steve Jobs. It really makes you think, doesn't it? If you want more concise explainers on the books and ideas that shape our world, you know what to do. Make sure you follow and subscribe. We'll see you next time.